meeting me in real life, you would see that I am a person with dwarfism. I am 4 feet tall as an adult, and I also identify as having mental health struggles due to the loss of my infant son almost 3 years ago, and then the loss of my ability to walk. And now I'm slowly regaining that ability to walk. So I was born into a family where there's no history of dwarfism. My parents are average height, and that is the case with 80% of cases of people with dwarfism are born into average height families with no history of dwarfism before. So when I was first born, my parents were told that I had dwarfism because there was one physician in the hospital where I was born who had seen a person with dwarfism, and they thought, okay, this baby seems to have those same features. But it didn't mean that they had all the answers. This was back in 1984, where the internet wasn't readily available. So it was suggested that my parents meet with a genetic counselor, and they were told to go to a different hospital than the one that we were at, and that hospital would have a resource who was a genetic counselor. But when we got to that hospital, there were signs that said birth defects everywhere around the building. My parents checked into the receptionist's office, and the receptionist said, follow the halls down to the signs that say birth defects, then you'll see the elevator for the floor that says birth defects. And when you get to that floor, there'll be another sign that says birth defects, and your genetic counselor will be waiting. None of us remember what was said during that conversation because the genetic counselor branded themselves in a way that was scary for new parents. No parent wants to be told that their child has birth defects, even if there are differences in their child. So my parents left the hospital and they wrote a letter to the hospital and asked for those signs to be changed because they know that it made many families uneasy seeing those signs. Fortunately, the hospital agreed to change the signs to say genetics, exactly what the genetic counselor was there to do, give them guidance on genetics. And I always tell that story because it was a point in my life where I was way too young to be able to advocate for myself. So my parents advocated on my behalf and continued to do so throughout my childhood until I was old enough to gain a voice and advocate on my own. I grew up in a community among average height peers. I really didn't spend much time around other little people. My sister, who's 3.5 years older than me, is average height. And whenever people would come over to our house, my parents said, you need to make sure that you give Courtney, my older sister, the equal amount of attention because you tend to lean towards catering to Becky because she's cute, but we need to make sure that there's fair treatment among the siblings. And because of that strong relationship that my parents fostered among me and my sister, we continue to have a strong relationship today. Sometimes my parents would want to take my sister on an outing because there were some times where I pulled away my parents from my sister because they needed to come with me to medical appointments or procedures. And my sister needed that extra time with them whenever it was possible. So they would say that they were going on mud baths because they knew that I don't like getting dirty. And it just sounded like something I would not want to do, even though those mud baths would really be an excursion to the playground or Burger King or a pizza place, just an opportunity for them to spend extra time with my sister. So in my school growing up, I had different accommodations that were helpful to me. I always tell people about the accommodations I had because they may not be helpful to everyone, but at least gives you a baseline on understanding what people with dwarfism may ask for when it comes to accommodations. So I had a step stool in the bathroom. The bathroom allowed for me to reach the toilet, and then I could reach the sink in the bathroom as well with the step stool. I had a pass that my teacher gave me so I could go to the bathroom whenever I needed to. Because of my short stature, I have a smaller bladder, so the urgency to go to the bathroom comes faster than for other people. I also had a set of books in my classroom and then back at home, so I wouldn't have to put too much pressure on my back. It's very common for people with dwarfism to have spinal stenosis, meaning our spinal column is very close to our spinal cord, and it could pinch it at any point in our lives. So at the age of 15, my spinal column was pinching my spinal cord, and I did lose my ability to walk for the first time. I was in a sailing race and I was wearing a wetsuit and I started to feel some numbness. And I thought that maybe it just had to do with my suit being on a little bit too tight, but that was not the case. The case was that I needed to go address the numbness because it was something more serious. I had an MRI and then I was scheduled for surgery about 2 months later. The thing that I was most fearful of was falling behind in school. I was used to being in the same classes with my average high peers, getting good grades, and having a surgery that could potentially be a setback was scary for me. I was less fearful about the surgery than I was missing school. But I did have to pursue the surgery because the other choice was to lose my ability to walk indefinitely. And fortunately, I had a successful surgery. I missed 29 days of school. And then once I returned from surgery, I was able to get caught back up in my classes. And then in the following years, I applied to 9 colleges and chose to go to Providence College in Rhode Island. The reason why I chose Providence College was because there was another person with dwarfism in the cafeteria. Why this is important is because there are only about 65,000 people with dwarfism in the United States. That's a very small percent of the population. So when I saw someone in that college campus that was like me, it felt like the right place to be because the community at the college had seen at least one other person like me, so they knew how to act, hopefully with respect, and that they did. Once I got to college, it was a challenging experience trying to fit in for the first time, explain myself as a person with dwarfism who's constantly trying to adapt to a world that's not made for me. But I figured out how to make it work. And then I pursued 9 internship experiences, and the real challenges came after college. I chose to move out to Los Angeles because that was where the entertainment industry is. And why I wanted to work in the entertainment industry was because changing what we see in the media impacts how people with disabilities, more specifically people with dwarfism, are treated in society. Historically, up until that point, all I would see is elves, leprechauns, circus characters, people that one tends to make fun of, a character that may seem like it's giving you permission to laugh. And that leads to society pointing, staring, and laughing at us. So what I did was I found a way to break my foot in the door and influence the change, try to encourage people to think differently and find authentic roles for people with disabilities and people with dwarfism who fall within the disability community. Some people with dwarfism may not want to identify as having a disability, but the Americans with Disabilities Act defines dwarfism as or disability as a impairment that limits one or more of life's major activities, and using a step stool definitely impacts life's major activities. And I require steps or pedal extensions for driving and other things that are necessary underneath the Americans with Disabilities Act. I am proud to identify and align with the disability community because it's a much larger population of people than the smaller dwarfism community. But I think there's a fear of disability. People are assuming that it's a bad word and it's not something that you want to identify with because society makes it sound like that. People are fearful of disability and they don't even want to use the word. They'll say diverse ability, different ability is what you have. Yes, we know what point you're trying to get at, but disability should not be a bad word. It's a lived experience that's different, and it allows people to have different perspectives and allows us to adapt to a world that wasn't made for us. We're used to bringing the problem-solving skills to every environment we enter, and that includes the workforce. But when I got out to California, I thought that I had a job, and unfortunately, that job fell through right when I got to LA, and I had to start from the drawing board. I sent out 1,000 resumes, went on 100 interviews over the course of 4 months. Every time I walked in the door, I was judged based on my appearance. Nobody told me that I was not looking put together. Maybe I was exhausted from driving around town to 4 different interviews a day. Maybe I just didn't know how to interview or interact with professionals who were looking to hire people in certain areas of the industry. But since nobody told me that, I assumed that I wasn't getting the job based on my appearance. And it took 4 months for me to realize that maybe it makes sense to connect with temporary placement agencies where they can send me to go work somewhere and I can use my problem solving skills and see if that changes their perspective. I had 3 different temporary assignments. And then the third one, I was an employee for 7 months and then hired on full time as an employee. It was a victory to be able to finally get that permanent employment. But it didn't end there. It was very challenging working at a talent agency. I learned a lot, the ins and outs of the entertainment industry and how decisions are made. But I learned at an early stage that I did not want to pursue a career as a talent agent, but I stayed quiet and I proved myself as a hard worker until people started asking me about 4 years in what it was I was passionate about. And I said I was passionate about changing what we see in the media because that affects how people like me are treated in society. And people started listening and started asking how they could help. I was given a platform to host a panel discussion of people with disabilities who work in front of and behind the scenes in the entertainment industry, came together for a conversation. And then I launched a social media platform, Disability and Media, on Facebook and Twitter, now called X. And it is an opportunity for people with disabilities to see themselves represented. The entertainment industry is still very money focused, and the statistics still show that only 3% of roles in Hollywood describe disability, and 80% of those 3% of roles are played by people without disabilities. So the authentic lived experience doesn't even exist in media and TV and film. So the opportunity for other platforms to show stories of people with disabilities living their lives, doing important work is really beneficial. People want to see themselves represented. I went to a panel discussion once and a deaf boy overheard someone talk about a deaf adult. And he responded by saying he didn't know that deaf people become adults. So unless people see themselves represented, they don't know what that means for their future or if they'll have a future. It also impacts whether parents decide to keep their child after a diagnosis. I'm very thankful that my parents were supportive and gave me the platform to thrive. But not all families are like that. And sometimes if they've seen something negative in the media, they'll immediately think, I can't handle that. If their story is coinciding with what they see in the media. And that may change the trajectory of their child's life, whether or not they can accept it or not. So I was fortunate to continue, even as an adult, to have a support system. And I really hope that other community members can be that support, even if someone doesn't have it within their own family. But while I was out in LA, I had a great experience. I really wanted to figure out how to change what we see in the media, but it was moving too slowly. So after 5 years at the talent agency and another year working in television casting at a TV studio, I decided to move back home. And I decided to go into schools and start talking to kids because they're the ones who don't have as much fear as adults. They can go home and share different stories with their parents and say, look what I learned today. You should learn how to be more respectful of people with disabilities because they really do have more things in common with us than one may think. So really sharing my story, sharing with administrators the accommodations I had growing up, so those new students don't have to face what I had to face while trying to get acclimated in any school or work environment. And that also allows the child to decide if they want to ask for the same accommodations I had or ask for something different. There was one accommodation I had in school. It was when I was on the swim team. I was doing races with my average height peers, and I was allowed to do 25 yards while everyone else did 50. And that made me feel like I was more caught up with the team, and there was more of an opportunity for me to get a first, second, or third rather than being so far behind everyone else. And it worked in my community, but maybe other children don't want to stand out as much as I did and took that chance. So it really is what works for people. But if you ask questions rather than making assumptions, you can start to gain a greater understanding on what people's needs are and what they want to feel successful and included and feel like they belong. So as I continue to advocate for children in schools, I also advocate for inclusion in workplaces. We need society to stop being fearful of the disability community and view us as a unique contribution to the workplace and society as a whole. We are willing to adapt and we are willing to bring our perspective if we're welcome to the table. We don't want to just celebrate new hires with disabilities. We want to give people a chance to move up in organizations and not assume that we can't handle more responsibilities. We want to make sure that people get the proper mentorship. So don't just say you're doing a good job to someone. Give them that constructive feedback they need to learn and grow, because that's another fear that people have, their fear of offending. But it's much better for you to be honest with someone so they know where their future lies and if the future is going to be within your organization or somewhere else. And especially in communities where you're working with the disability population, you want to make sure the workforce represents people with disabilities so it can better enhance the customer experience. And that even translates to when it comes to digital accessibility. Don't be fearful about how are you going to please your customers before your employees, because your employees, if you make those platforms accessible, they can make the experience better for the customers. But if employees can't access the tools, they're not going to be set up for success. And for me, more recently, using a scooter and crutches to get around the community, I think it's really important to think about how people can get into doorways. I've struggled a lot to get into doorways if there aren't push buttons, but it's important for you to think about how that could also help other people, people who are with their hands full. One time I saw a sign where someone said, "Oh, I was at the grocery store and I had my hands full with bags and I couldn't open the door to my house." Well, that's kind of a temporary disability. People who are pushing strollers, people who have all different types of lived experience. If we weren't so fearful of the word disability, people would understand that temporary disabilities show up more than we think. So if we make this world more universal for everyone, hopefully there'll be less fear around disability and more people like me can feel welcome and a part of society. A few years ago, I lost my infant son to an accident at the hospital, and that was related to non-inclusive practices at the hospital. There wasn't an opportunity for me to see if my son was suffering during the accident because I didn't have the right step stool to access the crib that he was in. Then the staff, they acted like they were more comfortable than they were with the setup of the procedure that was taking place. And then that led to a huge mistake that was not a good outcome. So that is kind of the addition to the physical disabilities I have, trying to wrap my head around grief and losing a child. And we need to make sure we give people the space to bring their full selves and ask people how they're doing before you get into the interview questions, before you get into meetings, whatever the topic may be and how important it is. Nothing's more important than someone's physical health and mental health. So really create welcoming spaces, and people who may even struggle with mental health disabilities, once again, may not want to identify as having a disability, but it is considered a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act because it does limit one or more of life's major activities. So as I continue to talk about just my journey and the fact that we need to be less fearful of disability, I'd love to take a look at the chat and see what people have to say. So was there ever a time that I feel down and depressed, and what do I do to pull myself out of it? That's a great question, and I will end up sharing in the chat a video that I recently did, and I do talk about that. So I grew up being taught to have bad days. It can happen. Everyone has a bad day. But I got to figure out how to get up that next day. So maybe I get in a dark place. Fortunately, I have been safe in any of the times where I'm struggling mentally, just really trying to wrap my head around tough days. But I do get up that next day. It's a new, fresh start. So give yourself the space to struggle, but also figure out how you can get out of it, because life is a whole lot easier if you can get back up and try and stay positive. Are there any more questions? I'm going to go ahead and share the video in the chat so people can see it.
Becky, we have one comment. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you very much.
So Becky, we have one question that I received here. With your disability, how easy was it for you to look for somebody who will help you along the way? Did you have to ask a lot of time, or was it offered?
Offered. I was fortunate to be in a very welcoming community. So I would say for everyone here today, please offer to help someone. Don't assume they need help. I always use the example of the grocery store. Most likely, if I'm trying to reach something on the top shelf, I'm never going to be able to get it on my own. But I may be stubborn and try to get it first. So let someone know you're there to help, and then let them decide if they want to take you up on that offer. It's much better than someone who may approach me shaking because they're fearful of my presence. And that may not be the person that I want to ask to help me reach something. So it's important to kind of break that ice and let someone know that you're there to help.
Thank you.
So I know we have another question. Thank you. Difficult to push through when supervisors are intentional. Yes, it is tough it's tough when I think people assume that, especially for me being 4 feet tall, that I only have the capacity to think like a child. And that is not the case. So I know if someone is not using the right manners or being intentional about marginalization. And I wish that I had more courage to call someone out on it. And it's a fine line. So you have to be careful on how you communicate that it's obvious, but I don't let it impact how I feel about myself and how I continue to work on myself. Thank you so much.
So Becky, you mentioned something about the loss of your child and the inability to be able to see your son's situation at the time. So was there ever a change? Did a change happen in that location so that in the future there will be accommodation for, for people with disabilities?
I am told so, so I hope so. But I do need to follow up and make sure that it's actually happening.
Please feel free to continue, Becky.
Do we have just one more minute?
Yes, we do have one more minute. Sorry.
Okay.
So
Yes, no. So if anyone wants to stay in touch with me, you can always email beckymotivate@gmail.com. And then my website and social media is all Becky Motivates. Easy to find me. Happy to continue to be a resource, answer questions people may have. I know it was a quick amount of time, so would love to continue to stay in touch.
Becky, we have one question.
Alex.
is there a foundation for advocating for folks with disabilities, both
So
physical and mental?
So American Association of People with Disabilities, I'm gonna put the chat, and that is a big advocacy organization for all types of disabilities. I'll just put in Little People of America too, that in that chat.